Hi everyone. Welcome to week 4 of the Social Psychology of Work. This week, we'll wrap up our discussion of the presentation of self in everyday life. You are expected to read chapters 6 and 7. I hope you've enjoyed reading this book. It's one of my personal favorites. I love how Goffman explains what we've always known, which is that we are governed by invisible social forces that direct our behavior. Over to you now, Professor.
Thanks, Irving. I've really enjoyed working with you so far in this course. You are a little weird sometimes, but aren't we all? One thing we share in common is that we both love the presentation of self in everyday life. It's just a great read. Like you said, we all know that we are subject to invisible social forces, but we don't really think systematically about how these forces operate on us. And that's what's so great about Goffman's work. He takes some simple and common sense interactions and provides a useful framework for understanding them. Everyone does exactly what Goffman writes about. We are actors, performers. We work in teams and individually to promote our self-interests. But many of us don't really understand why we behave in the way that we behave. The presentation of self in everyday life gives us that explanation. Social forces are extremely powerful. We are constrained by them. They tell us what we can and should wear. They tell us what we can and should say. They tell us how we should and should not behave. And if we violate those social forces by acting out of context, then we suffer the consequences. It's fascinating, isn't it? These social forces that Goffman writes about are a lot like gravity. It's everywhere, all the time, putting pressure on us. But we can't see it or touch it. We know it's there and that it constrains our actions, but it's invisible. Just like the social pressures that we put on each other to conform. It's just fascinating. Maybe social psychology isn't that much different from physics. Okay, so let's jump into our lecture on the arts of impression management, and I hope that you enjoy this summary of dramaturgy. Hi there, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the arts of impression management. I have to say that this is one of my favorite lectures to give. Why? Well, because it's funny. Why can't we learn and have fun at the same time? Learning doesn't always have to be boring, although it often is, but it doesn't have to be that way. Goffman gives us a way of thinking about social interaction that often brings a smile to our faces. Well, at least a smile to my face. I don't know about you. This set of lectures is all about when things go wrong. We've looked at a few examples of this in the last few weeks, but this lecture really demonstrates the fragility of the impressions that we try to create. They're really like glass that is easily shattered. Some lies we can fairly easily recover from. You might, for example, take a sickie from work one day. Later in the day, you're walking around and your boss sees you. Oh no, you've been caught red-handed. Well, not really. You can always say, well, I was just on my way to see the doctor. Problem averted. But for other lies, there's really no coming back. Let's look at an example of a teenage boy who, believe it or not, is arrested for impersonating a doctor. Check it out.
Malachi Love Robinson, the teen, marched out of his Florida clinic in handcuffs.
Malachi, they say you've been practicing medicine without a license?
Sitting down with ABC News overnight, released from jail early Wednesday morning on a $21,000 bail after being busted in a sting operation in West Palm Beach, caught allegedly giving a medical exam to an undercover officer. Were you a doctor of anything? Anything at all?
I do currently hold a PhD in what I don't feel comfortable disclosing because that is not the issue here.
But you
the
treat
issue
people
that
at your
I face
office.
now is accusations.
The 18-year-old indeed facing serious accusations from police, 7 including grand theft, and allegedly practicing medicine without a license, and last month he proudly showed off his medical center to our affiliate WPFB.
This is the New Birthing Life Medical Center.
But peel back the tape and the sign on the door has his name and these 2 crucial letters, MD.
That sign on the door was actually due to be changed. There are many types of degrees out there that hold the title as doctor, whether they are a physicist or an engineer. Just because someone has the title doctor in front of their name does not necessarily imply MD.
Have you had training?
I have shadowed many doctors.
You're saying your training comprises shadowing other doctors, real doctors. That's your training in medicine.
Your training comprises of a lot of things.
But you weren't in med school.
Exactly. So I am not portraying as an MD. I've never said that I've gone to school to be a MD.
But the teen who goes by Dr. Love does advertise an array of treatments on his medical center website, including phototherapy, food and air therapy, and naturopathy.
I have been studying this particular field for a while. May not have been 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, but it has been long enough to, I would say, justify what I do.
Including apparently treating the elderly. In a criminal complaint, an 86-year-old woman said he recently treated her for severe stomach pain, paying him nearly $3,500. What services did you provide in exchange for that money?
I can tell you this. Accusations are merely accusations. And services, you'd have to define that. Whether she paid for me to just show up, that's up to her.
You're not denying the fact that she paid you $3,500 or so, correct?
No, I am denying that.
Are you a fraud? Because it seems like everything you're saying to me is either evasive or an outright lie.
I don't appreciate your tone. I don't appreciate the way you're portraying this interview to actually be.
And then a moment we didn't expect. Are you in big trouble? I mean, it seems like you've spoken to a lawyer who's prepared you to talk not only to the media, but the police as well.
I don't know where you're receiving this information from, but it is inaccurate. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut this interview short. I'm going to have to cut this interview short.
And in fact, he did, walking out the door. Now, we have a standing offer to Malachi to finish that interview. The teen has not yet been arraigned, but insisted throughout the interview he has done nothing wrong. He has also said that when all this clears up, he intends to open another clinic.
Poor Dr. Love. Okay, so Goffman describes an incident as any unmeant gesture, inopportune intrusion, faux pas, or scene that disrupts the definition of the situation. This might include, for example, an inappropriate outburst where you say something that's offensive in a given context. Or maybe you're delivering a performance and your wig falls off, exposing your bald head. Maybe you're in the middle of a performance and you trip and fall over. It happens, right? Or maybe you violate the rules of etiquette. For example, you accidentally let out a burp or a fart during your performance. When an incident takes place, we're often left feeling embarrassed, humiliated, or nervous. An inopportune intrusion is when an outsider unexpectedly enters a performance or when the audience inadvertently sees backstage. For example, your boss walks in on you making out with the coworker. Oops! Or a customer accidentally walks in on the kitchen of a restaurant and sees a rat. Goffman defines a faux pas as when a performer accidentally discloses facts to the audience that discredit the performance. For example, you send an email to a coworker criticizing your boss, but to your absolute horror, you find out that you accidentally CC'd your boss into that email. Believe it or not, this happened to one of my friends, and it was a debacle. What Goffman calls a gaffe or a boner is when a performer accidentally destroys the team's self-image. Imagine, for example, you walk by the IT department at your workplace and you see one of the IT guys reading a book called Computers for Dummies. This kind of incident affects the reputation of the whole team. Finally, bricks are when a performer jeopardizes the image projected by a competing team. This is like throwing a brick at the other team. For example, revealing evidence during a performance that a member of the other team is a fraud. Or, for example, when a professor shows evidence that a student has cheated on a test. In short, I think it's safe to say that no one really likes incidents too much. Now, let's talk about causing a scene. We have all caused a scene before. Why? Well, because we've all been children at one point in our lives. Children are renowned for causing a scene. They kick, they scream, they cry, they throw a tantrum when they don't get what they want. But we often excuse that behavior because they're too young to know any better. When it happens among adults, a scene is defined as an intentional attempt on the part of an individual to destroy or threaten the polite appearance of a working consensus. Scenes are really disruptive. When you cause a scene, the definition of the situation is disrupted so much so that a whole new scene is created. Sometimes a scene can involve an argument or a dispute with the audience. Other times a scene might involve an argument or a dispute with team members during a performance. This is when members of a team criticize each other on the front stage. Now, anytime a group rebukes another member during a performance, this obviously causes a scene because it gives the audience a backstage view and causes them to question the realness of the performance. Another example of a scene is when a performer is found out and so begs for mercy from the audience. Or, for example, when a dispute between two or more people becomes loud and spills over into other social interactions. We all know someone who's really good at saving the show, right? These people are always helpful to have on a team. They're good at improvisation. Sometimes things happen that cannot be anticipated. Sometimes we're surprised by incidents. A real professional is someone who can spontaneously deal with the problem and get the performance back on track again. This is called saving the show. It's a defensive practice aimed at safeguarding the integrity of the performance. I've combed through the internet and picked out two really good examples of people who successfully saved the show. Both are examples of interviews that have gone wrong. In the first clip, an African migrant goes to the BBC headquarters in London to apply for a job as a cleaner. But he's mistaken for an expert and, to his surprise, is brought live on air during a BBC show. Now, at first, you can see that he's shocked by the fact that they put him on TV. But after a while, he starts to act like an expert, and he even begins to feel confident in giving his opinions on the matter being discussed on the show. The second clip is also an interview gone wrong. In this case, a professor is giving an interview, and halfway through, his children walk into the room. Even with them in the background, he doesn't miss a beat. He just keeps on talking as though they weren't even there. His poor wife jumps into the room at the end of the interview to pull the children out. See what I mean? Children are always causing a scene. Enjoy these clips.
So what does this all mean for the industry and the growth of music online? Well, Guy Cuny is the editor of the technology website News Wireless. Hello, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Were you surprised by this verdict today?
I'm very surprised to see this verdict to come on me because I was not expecting that. When I came, they told me something else, and I'm coming. you got an interview there. So it's a big surprise anyway.
A big surprise.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah. With regards to the cost that's involved, do you think now more people will be downloading online?
Actually, if you can go everywhere, you're gonna see a lot of people downloading to the internet and the website everything they want. But I think it's much better for the development and to improve people what they want and to get on the easy way and so fast the things they're looking for.
This does really seem to be the way the music industry is progressing now, that people want to go onto the website and download music.
Exactly. You can go everywhere on the cyber cafe and you can check. You can go easy. It's gonna be very easy way for everyone to get something to the internet.
CUNY, thanks very much indeed. I think we can now also speak to...
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year because of North Korea's behavior. Most recently, the use of VX gas in the airport in Malaysia. That indicates that North Korea really doesn't follow global norms in any kind of way. That's a weapon of mass destruction. If it had slipped out onto a plane or something like that, it would have been a genuine catastrophe.
Okay, at this point in the book, Goffman goes on to talk about the defensive practices that performers use to safeguard the integrity of their performances. As we've already learned, performances are highly vulnerable to disruption. As a result, it is essential that performers are able to trust one another. The darker the secrets that are kept within a team, the more trust is needed amongst the members. This is because anyone who defects and betrays the team's secrets can cause a lot of trouble, obviously. There are some rules of dramaturgical loyalty that Goffman spells out. Thou shalt not betray secrets. Thou shalt not denounce other members of the team during a performance, although it is perfectly fine to take corrective action backstage, of course. Thou shalt accept whatever part you play in a team, no matter how minor. Power struggles within teams are problematic because they create an incentive for members of the team to turn against each other. So everyone is urged to accept their place in the team and not to rock the boat. Goffman also argues that one of the best ways to develop trust and solidarity within a team is to derogate members of the outgroup. We'll learn more about the principle of social psychology regarding derogation of others in the second half of this course, where I'll be talking about it in the context of social identity theory. But for now, it's important to note that Goffman sees significant value in one group making fun of another group because it brings them closer together. Another important defensive practice is to maintain what Goffman calls dramaturgical discipline. He defines self-control as the ability to suppress socially inappropriate emotional responses and to show poise in the face of difficulty. This is one of the reasons why children do not make, generally speaking, good teammates. They have poor impulse control and are therefore unable to effectively project the desired definition of the situation. So self-control is essential. This means that no matter what happens during social interaction, you toe the line and you do not commit unmeant gestures or faux pas. Furthermore, when a mistake is made during a performance, it usually takes a disciplined performer to fix it spontaneously. Because discipline is so important to the integrity of a performance, team members must be careful when consuming, for example, drugs and alcohol. Even the most effective performer can become a severe liability to the rest of the team if he or she is somehow impaired during a performance. The inability to control oneself is a serious liability for the rest of the team. And yet another important defensive practice is what Goffman calls dramaturgical circumspection. That's a big word. So what does it mean to be circumspect? Someone who's circumspect is clever and risk averse. They prepare in advance for contingencies when things go wrong. They reflect on the various scenarios that could unfold during a performance. And when one of those scenarios materializes, they are able to cope with those problems. Even though Goffman's dramaturgy is at times humorous, Goffman himself would argue that performances are serious business. As such, team members must treat them seriously, with all due weight and dignity. They must take all possible measures to ensure success and to avoid failure. They must choose their audiences carefully, avoiding those who will be excessively critical and performing to those who are likely to accept the definition of the situation that is presented to them. A circumspect performer should abandon any high-risk performances unless there is an equally high reward along with them. In short, circumspection is important because it helps us to manage risk and avoid failure. Let's talk a bit more about risk management. So Goffman proposes some general rules for performers when it comes to minimizing risk and uncertainty. This is kind of like a handbook or something on how to maximize the chances of success in any performance. You should take note of these general rules because they might help you to become a more effective performer in your own lives as well. Okay, first, smaller teams and smaller audiences are always preferable to big ones. The larger the teams and or the audience, the more that can go wrong. It's just easier to organize a performance when smaller groups are involved. Second, sticking to the facts reduces risk, of course, but it's also less dramatic. Communicating only the truth is a safe bet in that you won't be found to be fraudulent by the audience. But the truth is often pretty boring. This is why we exaggerate and fabricate when we interact with others. It's just a better story that way. If you want to create a lasting impression on others, it's usually easier when you are not bound by the truth. Third, ceteris paribus, that is to say all else being equal, shorter performances are less susceptible to errors than longer ones. The longer the performance goes on, the more time the audience has to discover its flaws. Eventually, someone is going to make a mistake on the team. And when that happens, the house of cards comes tumbling down. Fourth, an audience of strangers is riskier than an audience of friends. Friends are always more forgiving. Friends are much more likely to turn a blind eye to discrepancies in your performance. We don't want to embarrass our friends, but with strangers it's different. Strangers often have no interest in maintaining the relationship, so they can be particularly harsh on performers. Fifth, it's really important to pay close attention to props and the setting. The more control that you have over the layout of the stage on which you perform, the more likely your performance will be a success. Knowledge of your surroundings, particularly where you can find a backstage if needed, is very helpful. Sixth, the more serious the consequences of a situation, the more care must be put into a performance. Now, if you're having, for example, lunch with a group of friends, there's not much pressure on you to deliver a knockout performance. But if you're going to a job interview, the stakes are obviously really high. Seventh, be careful when, where, and how you relax your role. Anytime you relax, you must ensure that you are backstage and away from the audience. If the audience sees you acting in a way that is incompatible with the role you've tried to foster to them or with them, the whole performance can come crashing down. Finally, although it seems obvious, rehearsals are essential to success in performances. Practice makes perfect, as they say. The more you practice, the better and the more believable your performance will be. Okay, let's take a little break. I'm now going to hand it over to Irving, my avatar, and he will let you know what this week's forum activity is. Good luck, and I'll see you in a little bit.